The story of King Solomon begins not with his birth, but with a moment of extraordinary humility and faith. Solomon, the son of King David and Bathsheba, was not David's eldest son, nor the one most expected to succeed him. Yet, it was Solomon whom God chose to be king over Israel, a decision that would lead to one of the most intriguing and impactful reigns in biblical history. His ascent to the throne and the wisdom he later displayed was not only a testament to God's sovereign will, but also a powerful story of how God takes what seems small and transforms it into something great. When Solomon became king, he was young and untested. The weight of ruling Israel, a kingdom established and expanded by his father David, must have felt heavy. Solomon was aware of his limitations. Most men in his position, handed power and responsibility, might have asked God for wealth, military might, or the destruction of their enemies. After all, ruling a kingdom in ancient times often meant making quick and ruthless decisions for survival. But Solomon did something shocking. He asked for none of these things. Instead, in a dream at Gibeon, God appeared to Solomon and told him, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." In this moment, Solomon asked for something unexpected and profound: wisdom. He recognized that he was young and inexperienced, and the task before him was too great to bear on his own. He could have asked for riches or a long life, but he sought an understanding heart to judge the people and discern between good and evil. This act alone reveals something remarkable about Solomon's character at the beginning of his reign: his humility. He knew that true leadership required more than power. It required insight, compassion, and the ability to make just decisions. God's response to Solomon's request is both awe-inspiring and instructive. Not only did he grant Solomon unparalleled wisdom, making him the wisest man to ever live, but he also gave him what he did not ask for: riches, honor, and a long life. God said to Solomon, "Since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you have asked." This was a promise of divine favor, one that would propel Solomon to a level of greatness no other king in Israel's history would achieve. What many people may not know is that Solomon's wisdom wasn't just a mystical gift, it was grounded in his fear of the Lord. The Bible says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and this is evident in Solomon's life. His humility and recognition that wisdom comes from God were crucial. It wasn't just about knowing facts or making clever judgments. His wisdom was deeply rooted in a relationship with God. Early in his reign, this wisdom was displayed in the famous case of the two women who came to him, each claiming to be the mother of the same child. Solomon's solution, offering to divide the child in two, was not only brilliant, but revealed the true mother through her willingness to sacrifice for her child. This incident shocked the nation and solidified Solomon's reputation as a king endowed with extraordinary discernment. However, beneath the glory and success of Solomon's early reign, there were subtle foreshadows of the challenges that lay ahead. Solomon's wisdom, as great as it was, would later be tested not just by political matters or judicial cases, but by his own heart. In choosing wisdom, Solomon initially placed God's will above his own desires. Yet, as the years passed, the allure of power, wealth, and alliances with foreign nations would test his devotion to God. It's fascinating to realize that while Solomon's wisdom made him the greatest king of his time, it was also the very thing that exposed the depth of human frailty. His story is a reminder that even the wisest among us are not immune to the temptations of the world. Solomon's life started with unparalleled wisdom, but it would also reveal the perils of trusting too much in one's own understanding rather than continuing to rely fully on God. The beginning of Solomon's reign, marked by divine wisdom and favor, is a powerful example of how God can transform ordinary people into extraordinary vessels of His purpose. Solomon's humble request for wisdom is a reminder to us all that when we seek God's guidance, He not only meets our needs, but often exceeds them in ways we could never imagine. Yet, his story also serves as a warning. True wisdom lies not just in receiving knowledge, but in maintaining a heart fully surrendered to God throughout life's journey. In Solomon's case, the gift of wisdom was a double-edged sword. It brought him immense success and respect, but it also highlighted the responsibility that comes with knowledge. As we explore more of Solomon's life, his rise to fame, and the later temptations that led him astray, we'll see that wisdom alone isn't enough to sustain a life of faith. It's the constant reliance on God's guidance, no matter how wise or powerful we become, that leads to true success and lasting peace. As Solomon's reign progressed, one of his most significant and monumental achievements was the construction of the temple in Jerusalem. This was not just an architectural feat, it was a spiritual and cultural milestone for the people of Israel. Solomon's father, King David, had long dreamed of building a house for the Lord, a permanent dwelling where the Ark of the Covenant could rest. However, it was Solomon who would be given the task of turning this vision into reality. What many people might not realize is just how pivotal this project was, not just for Israel's faith, but for the fulfillment of God's promises to His people. The temple, often referred to as Solomon's Temple, was the first of its kind in Jerusalem, and it was built with such grandeur that it became one of the wonders of the ancient world. But beyond its physical beauty, the temple symbolized something much deeper, the presence of God among His people. Before this time, the Ark of the Covenant had been housed in a tent, a temporary structure that moved with the Israelites during their years of wandering. The construction of a permanent temple in Jerusalem marked the end of that era and the beginning of a new chapter in Israel's history, where God's presence would have a fixed location in the capital city of His chosen people. The scale of the temple's construction was breathtaking. Solomon spared no expense, using the finest materials from around the known world. He ordered vast quantities of cedar wood from the king of Tyre, a neighboring ally, and had massive stones quarried to form the foundation. The workforce was enormous, numbering in the tens of thousands. Laborers, craftsmen, and artisans worked tirelessly to ensure that every detail was perfect. The inner sanctum, known as the Holy of Holies, was overlaid with pure gold, a testament to the reverence with which this space was regarded. It was in this inner chamber that the Ark of the Covenant would rest, representing God's throne on earth. What many may not know is the sheer amount of time, dedication, and labor that went into constructing the temple. It took 7 years to complete, and every element was meticulously designed according to the instructions given by God. Solomon ensured that the entire project was carried out with a sense of sacred purpose, knowing that this was more than just a building, it was to be the very house of God. But the most fascinating aspect of the temple's construction isn't just the materials or the grandeur. It's the fact that Solomon, the wisest king in history, oversaw the project. His wisdom guided every aspect of the construction, from the alliances he made to secure the resources to the way the work was carried out. And yet, the real power of the temple lay in what it represented: a turning point in Israel's relationship with God. For the first time, there would be a permanent place where the people could gather to offer sacrifices, worship, and seek the presence of the Almighty. It is also important to note the divine significance of the temple's completion. When the temple was finished, Solomon organized a grand dedication ceremony where he led the people in prayer and offerings. During this dedication, something miraculous happened. The glory of the Lord filled the temple in a way that had never been seen before. The Bible tells us that a cloud, symbolizing God's presence, descended upon the temple so powerfully that the priests could not even stand to perform their duties. This was a clear sign that God had accepted Solomon's work and was pleased to dwell among his people. Yet, there's an often overlooked aspect of this event that is worth noting. During his prayer of dedication, Solomon acknowledged that even the heavens could not contain God, much less the temple. This moment of humility, coming from a king who had built one of the greatest structures of the ancient world, is profound. Solomon understood that while the temple was a place for people to come and worship, it was not a place that could truly contain the infinite God. This realization is a testament to Solomon's early wisdom and his deep understanding of God's sovereignty. However, as glorious as the temple's construction was, it also carried a warning. God appeared to Solomon after the temple's completion and reminded him that if the people of Israel turned away from him and pursued other gods, the temple would become a ruin and the nation would suffer. This warning is often overshadowed by the celebration of the temple's completion, but it is significant. God's promises of blessings were always tied to Israel's faithfulness, and Solomon, despite his early success, would eventually experience the consequences of straying from God's commands. The story of Solomon's temple is one of triumph, a crowning achievement of faith, wisdom, and dedication. Yet, it is also a reminder that even the greatest accomplishments are fleeting if they are not sustained by continued obedience and reverence for God. The temple stood as a beacon of God's presence among his people, but it also foreshadowed the challenges that would come if Israel and Solomon himself forgot the source of their blessings. In the construction of the temple, we see the transformative power of God's promises. A young, inexperienced king like Solomon was given the wisdom and resources to build something extraordinary. Yet, the deeper lesson of the temple's story is that no matter how grand our achievements, they must always point back to God. Solomon's temple was a physical representation of God's covenant with Israel, but its true beauty lay in the way it symbolized the relationship between the Creator and his chosen people, a relationship built on faith, obedience, and the ever-present promise of his blessing. Solomon's reign, marked by incredible wisdom and the building of the temple, took a dark turn that many people may not realize. Despite his great achievements and God-given insight, Solomon allowed his heart to drift away from God in his later years, leading to his downfall. What's often overlooked in the story of Solomon is just how far he strayed from the principles that had once defined his reign. His slow but steady departure from God's commandments is a powerful lesson about the dangers of compromise and the subtle ways in which even the wisest can fall. One of the key factors in Solomon's downfall was his love for foreign women. Solomon, like many kings of the time, formed political alliances by marrying women from the nations surrounding Israel. These alliances were designed to secure peace and strengthen Israel's position, but they came with a spiritual cost. Solomon ended up marrying 700 wives and had 300 concubines, many of whom came from pagan nations. This not only broke God's command that the king should not multiply wives, but it also opened the door to idolatry. As Solomon aged, he began to build altars and temples for the foreign gods of his wives, allowing them to worship their deities in Israel. What makes this turn so shocking is that Solomon, the wisest man to ever live, the man who built the grand temple for the Lord, allowed idol worship to creep into Israel under his watch. It was a gradual decline, not a sudden shift, but it had devastating consequences. The man who had once been singularly devoted to God, who had prayed for wisdom to lead his people well, now found himself drawn into the worship of false gods like Ashtoreth, Molech, and Chemosh. These were not just harmless cultural differences. These gods represented everything that God detested: child sacrifice, sexual immorality, and corruption. Many people don't realize the extent of Solomon's fall into idolatry. The very man who had led Israel into its golden age of worshiping Yahweh ended up leading them into spiritual darkness. He built high places for these foreign gods, and his heart, once fully dedicated to the Lord, was now divided. This is a crucial part of Solomon's story that often goes unnoticed. The contrast between the early Solomon, the builder of the temple, and the later Solomon, the builder of altars to foreign gods, is stark and serves as a reminder of the subtlety of sin. It wasn't just Solomon's personal faith that suffered. His actions had far-reaching consequences for the entire nation of Israel. By allowing idolatry into the land, Solomon set a precedent that would lead future generations astray. His compromises weakened Israel's spiritual foundation, and the kingdom would soon feel the weight of his decisions. God had warned Solomon earlier in his reign that if he or the people turned away from him, there would be severe consequences. But despite these warnings, Solomon allowed his heart to be led astray. One of the most sobering parts of this story is the judgment that God pronounced on Solomon. God appeared to him once more, but this time with a message of judgment rather than blessing. Because of Solomon's idolatry, God declared that the kingdom would be torn away from him. However, because of his promise to David, God would not take the entire kingdom from Solomon's hands. Instead, it would be divided after Solomon's death, with only one tribe remaining under the rule of his descendants. This judgment marked the beginning of the end for Israel's united monarchy and the start of the division that would plague the nation for generations to come. What's often overlooked in the story of Solomon is how his disobedience not only affected him personally, but had long-lasting consequences for the entire nation. His compromises with foreign gods led to a spiritual decline that eventually resulted in the division of Israel into two kingdoms: the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. The once great nation that Solomon had ruled with wisdom and strength would soon be weakened by internal strife and external threats, a direct result of his failure to remain faithful to God. The story of Solomon's downfall is both tragic and instructive. It serves as a powerful reminder that no one is immune to the dangers of compromise, not even the wisest man in history. Solomon's drift from God was not the result of a single dramatic event, but rather a series of small, seemingly insignificant decisions that led him further and further from the truth. His story warns us of the subtlety of sin and the importance of remaining vigilant in our faith. But there is also a broader lesson here about the nature of leadership and influence. Solomon's personal failings had a ripple effect on the entire nation of Israel. His decisions didn't just affect him, they affected generations to come. This is a sobering reminder that our choices, especially as leaders, have consequences far beyond what we can see. Solomon's story challenges us to consider the long-term impact of our actions and the importance of staying faithful to God's commands, no matter how successful or wise we may become. In the end, Solomon's legacy is a mix of triumph and tragedy. He was a king who began his reign with extraordinary potential, a man blessed with unparalleled wisdom and favor from God. Yet, his story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of turning away from God's path. Solomon's wisdom may have made him great, but it was his faithfulness to God that made him truly blessed. When that faithfulness faltered, so did his reign, and the kingdom of Israel would never be the same again. If Solomon were to speak to men today, his warning would likely be simple yet profound. Guard your heart. It's not always the grand temptations that lead us away from God. Often, it's the subtle compromises, the small decisions to prioritize wealth, success, or relationships over faithfulness to God that ultimately lead to destruction. Solomon's story is a cautionary tale of what happens when we trade our devotion to God for the fleeting pleasures of this world. In the end, the man who once wrote the Proverbs, filled with wisdom about the fear of the Lord, became the embodiment of what happens when that fear fades. His story serves as both an inspiration and a warning to all who seek to follow God. No matter how blessed or wise we may be, we must remain vigilant, keeping our hearts fully devoted to God, lest we too fall as Solomon did. His final message would be this: no amount of wealth, wisdom, or power can replace a heart that is fully devoted to the Lord. Thank you for joining us in exploring the fascinating story of King Solomon. His life is a powerful example of wisdom, faith, and the challenges of staying true to God's path. If this story inspired you, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on more incredible Bible stories that bring ancient wisdom to life. Share this journey with us, hit that subscribe button, and let's uncover more biblical truths together.